Coming up on International Trade Focus.
How Ghana's school feeding program supports local agriculture and strengthens regional trade opportunities.
Hi there, welcome to today's episode of International Trade Focus, where we explore the homegrown school feeding program and how this initiative is crucial to food security and economic development in Africa. Now, while many countries, including Ghana, have adopted this program, organizations such as the auda-nepad provide technical support and policy guidance to ensure its success. Today, we'll see how Ghana is implementing the school feeding program to benefit local farmers, support local economies, and contribute to international trade. Now, we spoke with experts from the school feeding secretariats, the Ministry of Food and Agriculture, and others to understand the broader impact of this program. My name is Anna Spio, and you're watching International Trade Focus. International Trade Focus is brought to you by Gold Good Energy, ADB, Truly Agric, and more, Public Elegance, and Pediasi Valley Resorts. A warm welcome back. You're watching International Trade Focus, and on this week's episode, we are diving into Ghana's school feeding program and how it opens doors for local producers while promoting international trade. auda-nepad is instrumental in coordinating and supporting policies that help countries like Ghana implement effective school feeding programs. So by focusing on sourcing food locally, the program boosts agricultural production and trade, creating stronger local economies and opening doors to regional and international trade. We spoke with Dr. Clement Ajololo. He's the head of agriculture and rural transformation at the auda-nepad. Take a look. This conversation has been all about the school feeding program and its importance, its impacts, and how it trickles down to various sectors on the African continent, right? So what role does the auda-nepad play when it comes to the school feeding program?
You know, let's start from why do we need to feed our children at school to start with. It is very important. A school feeding program have many benefits. It has many outcomes. One will be feeding people. You cannot learn in an empty stomach. So feeding children will definitely yield better cognitive functioning. Children that are fed also will stay in school from what the data and evidence have shown us. We also will have a better educational outcome on the school feeding program. But school feeding program also extend beyond the classroom and beyond the health aspect. It is linked to value chains development. It is linked to local supply, so it touches on livelihood. You can source food locally to provide to schools and to feed the children. It means you create that chain that producers are involved, traders are involved, cooks are involved. Someone have to prepare. So it's a whole chain that ecosystem that you create around school feeding. We think it's a great driver for economic transformation. It is also improving our ability to produce locally and also enhance resilience. We have learned so much lessons from smallholder growers. During COVID, when the global community were shutting their borders, it is our smallholder farmers that fed us And yes, so we link the school feeding program to local production, local supply chains, and that is fascinating. Now, why is auda-nepad involved in school feeding? In my earlier intervention, when I made my remarks, I indicated that auda-nepad, then NEPAD, launched the homegrown school feeding alongside when we had our first continental program called CADEP back in 2003 during the Maputo Declaration. auda-nepad launched the homegrown school feeding, piloted it in 15 African member states, and the lessons that were learned, the experiences, today we've scaled it up beyond the initial 30 years. We're talking about more than 51 or so countries that are participating in some iteration of homegrown school feeding program. So yes, it is an AU decision to have the homegrown, recognize the homegrown. So the head of state recognized that school feeding program is an important intervention based on the many benefits that I've just outlined. Yeah.
Now, the importance of farmers on this value chain, we cannot underestimate, right? And I'm glad that you mentioned the smallholder farmers having our backs during the COVID period. So what would you say partnerships with these smallholder farmers, how would you say the partnerships with them impacts trade and even food security? And now food security has become topical. How would you say that partnerships with local farmers impacts trade and
So smallholder farmers form the bulk of our producers on the continent of Africa. Nearly 65% or so of food producers on this continent happen to be smallholder, classified smallholder farmers. They play a very critical role in feeding the continent, not just in the school feeding program. They are the ones that are providing food that is readily, that is safe, that is locally produced. So for us to be food sufficient, to have our food sovereignty, I think this is the constituency. The smallholder constituency is a critical stakeholder group that we work closely to promote and enhance. We aim to help smallholder farmers to be more productive so that it is more encouraging for smallholder farmers to continue to engage in farming. It is our model that we need to enhance it, strengthen it. They also farm on some of the orphan crops that big producers may not pay attention to. Smallholder farmers take care of our biodiversity, crop biodiversity issues, our livestock sector. So it is very important that we continue to support the smallholder group because they form the bulk of our growers. They are also the ones that are providing livelihood to women, youth across the continent. So we feel that it is a sector that is very important, and bringing them into the value chain on the school feeding just create a market and a demand for smallholder farmers. In terms of trade, it's, as you know, and rightly, we are in Accra. The Secretariat of the African Continental Free Trade Area is right here in Accra. It has to get to the ground. We cannot keep it up there. So it is very important that smallholder farmers should see themselves in how their produce can be traded nationally and across the borders. We have to have that regional approach. The issues that face our farming communities sometimes don't follow geographical boundaries. So if we have to follow agroecology, we have to follow a systemic approach, then we cannot just limit it to national jurisdiction. So it is very important that we have that cross-border trade, regional trade, and that is why the Continental Free Trade Area, its impact is far-reaching to benefit all grassroots communities. And as the AU, we really prioritize inclusivity and broad stakeholder involvement when it comes to issues of trade.
earlier on, I heard you talk about the essence or the importance of private partnerships or private investments as far as school feeding programs are concerned. And these investors, they're also looking at opportunities, right? So what kind of opportunities have you identified when it comes to investments in school feeding programs?
When we talk about private sector, we tend to be carried sometimes to think it has to be large scale commercial, but the private sector starts with even the smallholder farmer is a private sector, and all that are providing services in between from farm to the fork, private sectors. So the partnership with the private sector is important. What the private sector need is that conducive environment for the private sector to thrive. Sometimes we think we need to hold the hand of the private sector. Some of us have a thought that provide the necessary policy environment, provide the enabling incentives that will enable private sector to thrive, and private sector will thrive by themselves. We don't need to hold their hands. So from us where we are engaged in policy implementation, we work with member states so that we have the correct fit for purpose policies, instrument that allow private sector participation, for private sector to really get on board. We know that government alone cannot do most of the objectives that we want to achieve in agriculture, food systems. We need the private sector to be on board. We need all private sector. So we want to have a broad and inclusive participation of all private sector role players, from the women, farmers, producers, traders, they're all private sector. How do we ensure that their investment are secure? But how do we also provide the necessary evidence to crowd in more investment? So if we want bigger investment in homegrown school feeding, we also have to pay attention to our mechanisms for generating evidence, best practices to crowd in more investment. And that is one of the areas why AUD and NEPAD work with member states to create all these instruments, develop the tools. AUD and NEPAD, we have developed the guidelines for homegrown school feeding program that identify critical elements that need to be considered for private sector to really participate meaningfully. And yeah.
So talking about AUDA NEPAD on these conversations, how do you ensure that some of these programs, align with regional trade policies? We earlier on talked about the African Continental Free Trade Area. How does this fit in?
So in the broader scheme of things, we implement the CADEP program, which I unpack it as the Comprehensive African Agricultural Program. It is not called comprehensive for the sake of that. It is comprehensive in the sense that we have developed instruments for member states to be able to domesticate the policy framework, and through the national agricultural investment plans that member states develop or formulate and implement, along with many other tools. Under the CADEP program, we also have what we call the private sector wing, we call it CAPEF, that looked at the private sector engagement under CADEP. That ensures that private sector is coordinated in implementing the agricultural and food systems approach. So alignment comes from the continental to the regional. So you have ECOWAS in this region that also translate the continental framework into its member states, and then we go to the country level to ensure that programs are all aligned and implemented across the different countries.
So in all, what is the long-term plan? Talking about integration, talking about scaling up school feeding program. As a continent, I must say, taking a look at the data and the research that is out there, we are doing well, but we have such a long way to go. I just read some statistics that talks about how the school feeding program is feeding about 66 million children. I also saw the population of African children under the age of 17, and it's about 650 million. So we've made headway, but we still have a long way to go. So in terms of scaling up, how do you think it's going to be in the next couple of years? And what role is the auda-nepad going to play?
So the homegrown school feeding currently has evolved a lot from when it first started. As you may know, there are many stakeholders in supporting school feeding program across the continent, in the likes of even the UN agencies. AUD and NEPAD have partnership with the World Food Program, the WFP, rolling out school feeding programs. But in my intervention, I also mentioned member states are the biggest funders of school feeding. Up to 85% of all school feeding programs are national budget. It will grow as a proportion of how member states allocate resources and attract more investment into the sector. The long-term goal, as you mentioned, will be to have every child fed in school. That is the vision, that no child go to school hungry. And it is very important that we continue to bring in the role players and coordinate, have systemic capacities strengthened, have coordination, better coordination across the sector so that we create that demand and supply. And we have to look at it as a business. If we just limit it to as a social intervention, we might take longer. But when we create that business case for school feeding, the motivation will build, and then we can take it to scale quicker. Yeah. And I think that is why we are talking here about bringing on board strongly the private sector, create a strong business proposition for school feeding program. AUD and NEPAD will continue to support member states. As you may be aware, we are at a very pivotal moment at across the continent where we are about to adopt our next 10-year strategy for CADEP implementation, 2026-2035. This will be done in Kampala, January from 9 to 11. And member states were going to make new declaration. But one of the highlights is about moving from the agriculture, narrow agricultural focus to a broader food systems approach. That opens a whole lot of opportunities for us to be able to bring on board a multi-sectorial approach, so the issues of education, health, are all implicated in food systems. So I think that is also one of the quick wins that we're going to look at implementing more targeted interventions. And nutrition is one of the big levers that we are taking into the next 10 years. And definitely that is very much aligned with the objectives of the Grown School Feeding Program. So we think that Africa will progress. You talk about data. Data is still very scanty, sketchy, inconsistency, data quality issues. The African Union Development Agency is working hard with partners that in the next 10 years, we should have a systematic approach to data collection. So my colleague mentioned about having a biennial reporting on the status of homegrown school feeding. We're going to build that into our already existing reporting structure so that we are able to collect accurate data and be able to use that data to inform interventions that need to be done. So yeah, it's exciting for the future. Yeah.
If you just tuned in, you're watching International Trade Focus. This week, we look at Ghana's homegrown school feeding program and how it boosts local agriculture and provides new opportunities for international trade. We'll be right back after this break. Don't go away. A warm welcome back. You're watching International Trade Focus, and on this week's episode, we explore Ghana's school feeding program and its impact on local production, leading to potential global trade opportunities. Now, we spoke to key stakeholders, including the School Feeding Secretariat, the Ministry of Food and Agriculture, about how the program strengthens local food systems, supports smallholder farmers, and encourages local trade. Now, through these efforts, Ghana is creating a model for other African countries to follow, driving both economic growth and trade. Let's hear more from them. Madam Comfort, so earlier on when you were on the panel, having the panel discussion, you made a point that I thought it was noteworthy. You spoke about the fact that over the years we've had challenges as far as feed or feeding the birds and the poultry is concerned. You mentioned that perhaps a ban on the maize, like exporting maize outside the country because we are not able to even meet the local demand, shall be or might be the way to go. So I want you to expand or expatiate more on that point that you made.
We started the planting for food and jobs, and everybody saw that it was very successful. In fact, at the initial stages, we got a lot of maize. I don't know whether we were swollen-headed or what. We wanted to export to the neighboring countries. So Burkina came in, Nigeria came in for the maize, and we forgot that the poultry farmers in the country need the maize because years past, during the harvesting period, we get a lot of white maize, and this white maize is for both the populace and for the livestock, especially poultry. So during the lean season, before the lean season starts, that is when we have consumed all the maize, and even those we have stored are getting finished. The government normally came in to import yellow maize to support the poultry farmers. But this time round, the yellow maize was not imported, but rather what we have produced was exported to the neighboring country, and that brought a lot of problems to our poultry farmers. And that is where we are now, because the cost of feeding, which is about, the maize takes about 70% of the total feed, wasn't there. And if it was there at all, it was expensive. And those farmers who could afford stayed in. But I can tell you, more than 80% of our poultry farmers have stopped. Those who are doing it halfway. And that is the biggest challenge. Ghana National Association of Poultry Farmers have gone in. Most farms have closed down. And the few who are producing are really producing at a much higher cost. With research, to produce one egg, you need about 1 cedi 30 pesos for the bird to give you one egg. So how much do you think the consumer will buy? And that is what we are seeing now. Prices of eggs are very high. And that affects us because we, those talking about the nutrition, we want Ghanaians to eat eggs. We want our children, especially the school feeding program, to include eggs. But because of the price, and looking at how much a child, the government pays for a child in the school feeding program being 1 cedi 50 pesos, how can the caterer buy a tray of egg for 50, 60 cedis and then feed it to a child? No.
So, Madam Comfort, recently, Ministry of Agric, they issued out a communique that said that certain crops, including maize and sorghum, have been banned. As far as you're concerned, is this a step in the right direction? Exporting of those crops, maize, sorghum, have been banned.
I think it's a step in the right direction. And in fact, if we do that, we have to be full. I mean, food-wise, yeah. The populace should be comfortable. We should eat in comfort. And then when the excesses are there, that is what we send to other countries.
We've witnessed a very successful event, I must say, a needed one too, let me add that, considering how the school feeding program has become an essential part of Ghana. Now, there's been data that suggests, or data that shows that ever since the implementation of the school feeding program, education has quadrupled. Access to education, even just the zeal to go to school for a lot of people has more than doubled in the country. So events such as this is a step in the right direction so that we can boost the school feeding sector. Now we'll go back to the basics. Ministry of Food and Agriculture, what role would you say you directly play in the school feeding implementation?
The school feeding program actually started from the Ministry of Food and Agriculture under the CADEP Pillar 4. You know about CADEP, the Comprehensive Africa Agricultural Development Program. Yes. So for us to manage the issue of child nutrition, building cognitive development in the children, and also for the retention so they can be educated. Yes. So providing a hot meal a day for children to provide nourishment, etc., was the ultimate. And that, I think, has been achieved because provisioning of food in some homes is very challenging. So for children to leave home to a hot meal, it may not be adequate, but at least it brings them together, they bond, they socialize, they learn. And I think for me, they also stay out of crime. Yes. If all these energies are not mobilized, what do they do? So for us, facilitating food production is our business, why we exist. We don't produce food directly as a ministry, but to put in place policies, programs that will facilitate the production of food for the populace is why we are there. And we focus on crops and also livestock.
So talking about facilitation, we know that the role that farmers play cannot be overemphasized. So as the ministry, how do you relate with the farmers, or how do you, collaborate with the farmers to ensure that they're able to meet the demand?
Yes, we have production targets for the year. So the regions are able to determine how much they will be able to produce in collaboration with the farmers. Of course, we are a ministry. We can draw the broad programs. Implementation is at the subnational level, but there's great collaboration between the ministry and our departments of agriculture out there. So we have what we call crop cutting to estimate the key crops that are produced across the country. So we have an idea of the total production. And then we have extension support. Extension support is a public good. Nobody pays for it. So we have extension agents, though they are not too many, to support the farmers with current technologies to boost productivity. So that is being done. A lot can be improved around that, but as I said, our business is to boost production, and we have extension officers supporting these farmers to make good use of their inputs and then turn them into agro-produce for consumption and for sale.
I'm glad that you acknowledged that a lot can be done. Now, when it comes to challenges, I see it as an opportunity to perhaps get data on whatever it is that we are implementing in order to make it even better. So as far as you're concerned, what are some of the challenges that you've identified? And as the Ministry of Food and Agriculture, how are you handling these challenges?
One key is the data quality issues for us to do the right estimation. And we are now registering farmers and their farming lots. There are apps to set the coordinates for us to know the kind of crops they are growing, the quantum, etc. So you can track what is being done out there, even from Accra. So these are access controlled apps that are being used, and other systems are also being put in place for us to even use administrative data, clean, at least where we don't have surveys, etc. being done, we could still fall on administrative data to give us what we need to draft our strategies. So yes, the quality sometimes become challenging. And then we have the external factors, climate change. Nobody consciously brings that in place, but our actions culminates in that. So if we don't have rains, we keep cutting trees, we are drying the water bodies. So if we don't have the wherewithal to produce our crops and even to water our animals, our food security situation will be dire. So irrigation systems are also being planned to support all year round agriculture for some of the crops. Yes. So, and then the land conservation measures are also in place to support this. In addition, we have also drought-resistant varieties of crops that are also in the system for farmers to take advantage of. And then after harvest, we have to safeguard food from going waste. So there are silos for grain. And then we also train women, especially, on post-production processing of agro-produce to make them stable and make them available all year round. I can talk about pepper drying, I can talk about cassava drying into our kokonte flour, processing into gari, etc. So many commodities are processed for them to be available all year round with an extended shelf life.
So I believe that all what we are doing now, it all has a ripple effect. At the end of the day, it affects or it has a positive impact on our economy as well. So take a look at the Ministry of Food and Agriculture, for instance, enriching our local farmers to be able to produce more. At the end of the day, we are able to export more. So how would you say that you facilitating, this whole program, and particularly in terms of enriching local farmers and their production, how would you say that contributes directly to exports or agricultural exports in the country?
Well, I would say indirectly. It depends on which commodity. But then we have aggregators who are really experienced in the job. They know where to fetch commodities and aggregate them for the export market. So indirectly, farmers produce, sell for use within the country and beyond. But most of that is done by aggregators who go around sourcing for foods to export. And then also other forms of trade. Even if it is within, there are commodities that fare very well on our local market. So they also put money in the pockets of farmers. The challenging part for me is the dietary patterns of late, where consumers have adopted some preferences and we are not patronizing so much what the farmer is producing. Tomato, we don't want to use so much of the fresh. We want to use tin tomato in cooking. But if we are picking everything the farmer is producing, at least nothing will go to waste and he will get his money. And some of the other local stuff, fruits for instance, some of them become pricey. But if we are patronizing and then the demand is there to ginger production, and they will get a lot more money. We can push that into various feeding schemes, like school feeding. After feeding, if they get a cut or a wedge of fruits, it will support them health-wise. But we don't look at these things. Looking at children going to school in the urban centers, they go with a lot of sugar-sweetened beverages, some of which are not very nourishing. Meanwhile, we have our fruits all over. They come in their season, very colorful, but sometimes the cost is prohibitive. But we also don't have that eating culture. So we have been educating people. A fruit a day keeps the doctor away. Let's be eating from our own production just to be healthy and also empower the economy of the local people.
So what you've mentioned has drawn my mind to the quality of food that we produce here. Do you have a direct impact on that, or are there some institutions that you collaborate with to ensure that we are meeting the standards?
Yes, within the ministry, there's so much that goes on. There are outliers in every system where there will be abuse with the use of pesticides, for instance. So checks are in place to correct that. Unfortunately, we don't have systems in the country to check for, let's say, chemical residue in food, except for what is going for the export market. So we're advocating for these things also to be checked. But prevention, when you go on the preventive mode, you'll be able to minimize accumulation of these pesticides in our food. So that one, yes. But we work in concert with various institutions. Even in-house, we have the Plant Protection and Regulatory Services Extension also showing near best practice for the farmers to adopt and produce their food safely.
In terms of funding, in how are we funding the school feeding program? Is it solely a government budget that has been allotted to it?
So far, the school feeding in terms of procurement, etc., is government funded. But there are donors who are also supporting with some infrastructure. So some schools are having modern kitchens to support the cooking. At least then supervision can be an improved one over where the caterers cook in their own homes and they are so scattered all over. So the World Bank, UNICEF, the World Food Program. The World Food Program is supporting with rice fortification to boost iron in the foods of these school children. At least it will sort out the anemia problem for that age category.
So you did a presentation on the food systems. Yes. I had a question on that. I realized that if we are able to implement it, I know it's in progress, so if you're able to perhaps even boost it more, will it have a direct impact on our overdependence on imports? You know, for a lot of food stuff, rice and other things, we're still importing that. So perhaps if you're able to enrich the food systems and everything that comes with it, is it going to have an impact on import substitution?
Definitely, it will reduce the importation. Yes. If we have so much of the homegrown or own production of some of these commodities, definitely it will reduce the importation. If you recall the promotion of local rice by some of the media houses, there was great demand and in no time the supply base was limited. Yes, so it will drastically reduce the importation. Yes. And I would also want to say that even the little we produce, if we look at systems to reduce the losses, we will be fine as a country.
Ghana has implemented the school feeding. They've been doing this for a while. How do you assess the project?
School feeding has been structured to have community ownership. So it's basically about the locality where the school is located. We have what we call the school implementation committee at the school level that mans and have oversight responsibility about how the program should fare. And the composition of the committee, we have the PTA chairman, the head teacher of the beneficiary school, the boys school prefect, the girls school prefect, the assembly member of the electoral area where the school resides, the opinion leaders, the SHEP coordinator of the school, and the traditional rulers of the community. So basically, the ownership of the program is bestowed upon the community, and they have an oversight responsibility over the program, and they are to ensure that the assigned caterer and the cook adhere to the stipulated menu, what to cook and how to cook and how to serve. We have what we call the handy measures that serve as a guide as to how beneficiary people from KG1 to KG2 are supposed to be fed, lower primary are supposed to be fed, and the upper primary are supposed to be fed. And they are all to feed one hot, nutritionally adequate meal in every school going day in the term.
Right. So Ghana has implemented the school feeding program. You've been doing this for a while now.
Yes.
How would you assess the level of progress so far?
Well, honestly, the level of progress could be around 65%. You could not get efficiency running at 100%, but currently, as where we stand, we are doing over 65%, which is quite enormous. It's very good, and I'm sure the introduction of the digital feeding would also boost its impact to some over 80%, and that is what we are currently working on, the e-feeding.
So how are you assessing this, the 65%? What metrics are you using to measure, to come to that conclusion?
Well, the metrics is an open metrics. We are looking at where we picked school feeding from and where we have gotten to, the number of enrollments, the number of schools that has been drawn upon the program. At first, in some about 2016, the beneficiary schools were not 12,000, were somewhere around 5,000 to 6,000. But as of today, the beneficiary schools are around 12,000 beneficiary schools. And then in terms of pupil enrollment, was around 2.5 million. Currently, we are looking at 4.2 to 4.3. And this metric clearly shows that, in fact, there has been improvement with regards to the progress of school feeding in Ghana.
So you being a part of the school feeding secretariat or the school feeding institution, how would you say that this has affected or impacted the lives of local farmers and also Ghana's agricultural sector? You know, we can't leave the farmers out when it comes to the school feeding program. So how has it impacted our local farmers and also Ghana's agricultural trade?
Well, school feeding per its modus operandi is being structured to enhance the local economy of our farmers, small older farmers. They are the producers of the raw foodstuffs. And so our caterers buy directly from the smallholder farmers. And as they are buying from the smallholder farmers, the value chain helps them to also get adequacy in terms of capital to also inject into their farming practices. So in fact, school feeding and the farming community are interrelated. And then Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Health, it's intersectorial. So we have a link between the FBOs, the farm-based organizations, and then our caterers within the jurisdiction of the beneficiary school, where the caterers are mandated to buy 80% of their produce directly from the farmers. And by buying directly from the farmers, it means that you are getting raw, fresh produce so that you can cook and then you know to the benefit of the people.
When it comes to school feeding program, do you have any international partnerships that support this, its implementation, or is just solely the government of Ghana that has allotted budgets for it, or you get some international support in terms of funding?
Yes, in terms of absolute payment funding, we have the government of Ghana coming in with a full support, but we have our donor partners, World Food Program, NEPAD, and currently we have additional funding from World Bank. And this additional funding has come to also change the scope of school feeding, where we are transitioning from the analog way of feeding onto the digital way of feeding. And it's being financed by World Bank. So government of Ghana cannot do it all alone, especially exchange programs are being done by our donor partners, training programs are being done by our donor partners. Our donor partners has also helped, especially with World Food Program, with the piloting of our digital MIS system. They have given us tablets, and these tablets have been shared among some selected beneficiary schools. And this is what we are using in terms of assessing whether the impact of the digital agenda would pursue to help school feeding. So in fact, we cannot do without our donor partners. All we can say is echo to them, and we are asking for more donor support from them to make the program more sustainable. Because this program is indeed helping a lot of households in Ghana. Not everybody falls within the rich community. Almost 70 to 75% of Ghanaian population falls within the poorest of the poor. And having school feeding program on board, supporting the school-going population, I think it is a well-to-do program that we need more corporate sponsorship from our private partners and everyone who also want to support the program.
We know that lately we've been championing import substitution. So our over dependence on imports. Now we are saying that we are moving to a country that prioritizes exports more, or perhaps even prioritizes locally produced foodstuff and other things that we're talking about. So would you say that from where you sit, the school feeding program is sort of aligning with this current agenda of import substitution?
Well, with issues of import substitution, holistically becomes a national issue. But with the structure of Ghana's school feeding program, the foreign component is minimal because 80% of the materials or the foodstuffs are coming from our local farmers. So with us, we buy the local rice, our tomatoes. We don't use tea tomatoes. We don't use the tin tomatoes. We don't use sardine. Basically, we don't even use meat nor fish. The only ascribed fish that you can use is anchovies. And anchovies are, are fish from our sea. So the component of school feeding, we don't have foreign produce coming in. It's basically about our local farmers. And under the local farming, we have the linkages. We have the farmer-based organizations within every constituency. Remember, in every constituency or in every district, we have the Ministry of Agriculture, MOFA, over there. So that is those we work in hand because school feeding is intersectorial. We work in hand with the MOFA in that particular district, and they link the caterers to the farmers. So we are buying directly from our farmers and not directly buying from the market. When we are buying from the market, that is where this kind of foreign goods comes in. And foreign goods are very expensive. Good. So we advise that per the grant that we are paying, we source locally and not foreign. So with the import substitution, with us in school feeding, we advocate that our caterers buy directly from our local farmers to also boost their economy.
Right, so here are some key takeaways from this week's episode. Ghana's homegrown school feeding program helps local farmers by purchasing food directly from them. This does not only benefit local farmers, but it also creates opportunities for trade in agricultural products. The program encourages sustainable food production and trade practices that can extend to neighboring countries and beyond. And on that note, this is how we draw down the curtain on this week's edition of International Trade Focus. Join us same time next week for some more on international trade-related activities here in Ghana and beyond. International Trade Focus is brought to you by Gold Good Energy, ADB, Truly Agric and more, Public Elegance, and Pediasty Valley Resort. Bye-bye.